Welcome to the Open Door Sunday School class lesson. We are thrilled that you have joined us today. I am Catherine Bunce. We're going to open our Bibles today to John 9, and we will follow the story of the man who was born blind. There's a lot going on here rather than just the miracle that it is. This is a story of faith. The man born blind had to overcome an enormous amount of conflict after his healing. Most people see the healing of the man born blind as a miracle. Jesus made a mud pack, put it on the blind man's eyes, and told him to wash in the pool of Siloam. Amazingly, he was then able to see it was an event which confirmed that Jesus was in fact the Son of God. Miracles happen then, and miracles happen today. When a baby is born, that is a miracle. When someone's cancer goes into remission, that is a miracle. When somebody recovers from bacterial meningitis after being paralyzed on their left side and in a coma for a week, with a frightened family called in twice, that too is a miracle. Miracles occur in a variety of ways. Thank you, Lord, for miracles, life-changing events that restore lives to wholeness. The Apostle John was the only gospel writer to tell of the healing of this man. What John wants us to do today in John 9 is to have our own vision restored. He does that by presenting the story with several other characters, each of whom suffer from spiritual blindness. Shortly after the Feast of the Tabernacles in the early fall of 29 AD, Jesus and his disciples were entering the temple area, and they saw this man that was sitting there, and he was a beggar, and he had been born blind. The reason that he chose to sit outside the temple, of course, is the flow of traffic that they had. So John starts off with, now as Jesus passed, he saw a man who was blind from birth. The fact that Jesus sees this blind man is in itself remarkable. People prefer to pass by beggars without seeing them because it's painful to see their misery. To see a man or woman that is so far gone that there is no hope of restoration is so terrible. This man became part of the background, but Jesus sees him. This is the first step toward the man's healing. And his disciples ask him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man, or was it his parents that he was born blind? And Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. The light and darkness, of course, are symbols of good and evil in this gospel. As the light of the world, Jesus has come to enlighten the people about God. He will bring physical light to the blind man, just as he will bring spiritual light to the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with clay. And he said, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which translated means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously had seen him that was blind said, is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, oh, this is he. And others said, well, he looks like him. And he said, I am him. First, there were the disciples. They suffered from a blindness of theological ineptness. It was their understanding that the man was blind because of his sins. Now, that was a common belief in their day, and it actually hangs on for today. That if you did something or do something, God is going to punish you with an ailment or a disease. You may not have even been guilty, the guilty person. The disciples' questions assume that this could have been inherited from his parents because it was a sin of the parents, or it could have been the blind man's sin. Now let's think about that. The blind man was born blind, therefore he would have had to have sinned in the womb. Jesus denied that belief when he said neither this man nor his parents sinned. Well, second, there were the neighbors. They were blinded by denial. Wasn't this man the beggar? No, that can't be him. He was a blind man. He told them he was indeed the beggar, but they did not believe him. Denial is another form of blindness, when you are not willing to see what is real. Denial is essentially disbelief and a coping tool that people use to reject truth. It is easy to understand their confusion. Our eyes are the windows into our soul. This man's eyes had been dull and they had been lifeless. His posture and his demeanor were those of a beggar wanting pity. Now his eyes are open and full of light. He is astonished and excited. He no longer is crouching on the road or moving hesitantly through the crowd. He is no longer the man that they had known. It is no wonder that they failed to recognize him. How were your eyes open, they ask in verse 10. Well, we have another group, and that is the Pharisees. And I'm going to give you a little side that I usually tell in my Sunday school class when I talk about Pharisees, because I had trouble understanding and remembering what was the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, both groups are in the Sanhedrin, and this is the Jewish council, and they're very powerful in there. And so when we talk about the Pharisees, we know that they are lawyers. Well, all you have to do is to say their names, because it says fair, I see. So the Pharisees are your lawyers. Well, the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, nor did they believe in angels. So their name is Sadducee, because they didn't believe in the resurrection nor of angels. Okay, back to the story. The Pharisees suffered from a blindness of righteous indignation. How dare Jesus break the rules and heal someone on the Sabbath? That's a Jewish law. And how can a man, meaning Jesus, who is a sinner, perform such signs? Well, accepting Jesus as the Messiah, or even as a religious leader, would weaken the Pharisees' power. The threat to their power caused them to threaten Christ's followers with being cast out of the synagogue. Now, if you're cast out of the synagogue, you lose everything as far as that community was concerned, because that's going to be where they are, that's their livelihood, and that's meeting up with the people. That's everything that has to do with the Jewish community is tied up with being in the synagogue. So if they're kicked out, then that life is changed. So when he was blind, the man was dehumanized and reduced to begging. Well, casting him out of the synagogue for believing the man who had healed him was another act of dehumanization. Unfortunately, there are times in this day and age when rules prevent us from reaching out to others and denying the opportunity of being an agent of God's grace. Fourth, we have the blind man's parents. Now remember, The people did not want to be kicked out of the synagogue. So they suffered from a blindness of selfishness. They did not want to lose their seat in the synagogue. So the Pharisees said, oh, we don't know if this man has been blind from birth, so let's just go get the parents. So they go out and they bring the parents in, and the parents are terrified. Rather than believe and stand up for their own son, they chose to distance themselves in order to save themselves. And in verse 21, they said, he's of age, ask him. He'll speak for himself. That's the parents. Finally, there's the rest of the people, the crowd. They suffered from the blindness of rejection. The implication is that all society was challenging this poor man on his new sight and wanted him to reject what Jesus had done for him. All the man knew was that he was blind and now he could see, but they did not want to hear that. So the blind man was surrounded by a community who all suffered from the same or some form of spiritual blindness. Sadly, no one acknowledged that a miracle had taken place. No one rejoiced or praised God for the man's ability to see. No one asked him what it felt like to be able to see his family for the first time in his life. Instead of being excited that God had intervened and helped the man to see, they rejected it because of his profession of faith. When we have faith, we see. We see that God works in the midst in spite of ourselves. Too often, we're like one of the 5 characters in the story. We are spiritually blind, perhaps. We can't see because we're afraid of change. We don't want to open our eyes for fear of losing our security. We cling to old rules and traditions because that is what they're used to. And it's easier to go along with status quo and remain blind instead of allowing God to correct our vision. And all society rejected the blind man who could now see clearly. There was, however, one exception, and of course, that was Jesus. Jesus went looking for the man. He found him and affirmed his faith. Jesus said to him, I came into the world so that those who do not see may see. He said to him, back in our story, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which meant sent, so that he went away, washed, and came back seeing. The pool of Siloam was also referred to as the Messiah's pool, just in case the people didn't catch the connection with Jesus being the Messiah because he healed the man born blind. He sent the blind man to the pool that was known as the Messiah's pool. Now at this point, the man has not expressed faith, or he's not even asked for healing. His role has been totally passive until he washes at the pool of Siloam. Jesus used the clay made moist with his saliva, and the people of that day believed that the spittle had a curing quality, so maybe that's why he used that. Jesus' use of mud also recalls the creation story, where Jesus brought forth life out of the dust of the earth in Genesis. And Jesus said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Yet then Jesus gave a command that had to be obeyed. Had the man walked off in the other direction, never to have obeyed the command to go wash in the pool of Siloam, he would have remained blind until he died. Faith does not exclude the need to obey. And that takes us back to 1 Samuel, when Samuel was talking to King Saul. King Saul had been sent out with a job to do, and he came back and the job had not been done. And he goes to him and he says to obey is better than to sacrifice. So a washing is required. The healer doesn't even go with the infirmed man to the water, and the healing takes place only after he obeys. So he went away, washed, and came back seeing. The man was healed, but not only were his eyes healed, but a second miracle has taken place as well. He returned seeing. Now I have to go into this a little bit. I'm a science teacher, so I have to give you a little scientific information here. The brain of the blind, a person that is born blind, has no wrinkles in their brain of vision. None. They have it for hearing, for seeing, for talking, and all the other, but there is nothing in the brain. So after a person that is born blind is healed, they are in confusion for a very long time. And a neurologist even said that one must die, pardon me, as a blind person to be born again as a seeing person. So when Jesus heals this man's eyes, he also gives him mental ability to understand what he is seeing. Even the blind man stated, since the world began, it has never been heard of that anyone that opened the eyes of someone that is born blind. How were your eyes open? People are asking the same question over and over again. The crowd's confusion gives the man the opportunity, though, to serve as a witness for Jesus. Then they ask him, well, where is he? And the blind man says, I don't know. This man's repeated and humble confession of ignorance stands in contrast with the Pharisees' brash statements. The purpose of the miracle in the New Testament was to confirm the authority of the spoken word. When some charged that Jesus could not be God because he healed a man on the Sabbath, the others, now we're talking about the ones in the Sanhedrin, so these are Pharisees and Sadducees, they point out, well, how can this man be a sinner and still do these miracles? What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? This kind of repeated questioning is designed to put the man on the defense or to find a chink in his story, and that will cause the story to unravel. He says, I told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciple, do you? This man taunts the questioners, exhibiting great courage. Again, this is remarkable. He has lived his entire life in darkness and suddenly finds himself in the middle of the spotlight with the Pharisees asking questions. Most people would have been overwhelmed. This man is equal to the situation. He said again, I don't know if he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that I was blind, but now I see. He now refuses to be drawn into the opinions about others, about things he does not know, but he steadfastly affirms the things that he does know. The Pharisees then accuse him of being Jesus' disciple, and they said, but we are the disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as far as this man, we don't know where he has come from. To which the man that had been healed stated, how amazing! You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. And he went on to point out, if this man were not God, he could do nothing. And the Bible goes on to say in John 5 that on the last day, Moses himself will be their accuser. So the power of this man's witness is reflected in the anger responses of the authorities. Known for their learning, they find themselves losing a debate with an unschooled beggar. A lesson for us Our most powerful witness of Christ is our testimony of what he has done for us. How amazing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opens my eyes. Well, the passage is full of delicious irony. The blind man sees, and those with their eyes choose to close them to the truth. To be on the losing side of an argument with a beggar is more than they can handle. But these Pharisees are no longer discussing theology. Now they're just simply throwing spears. And then they eventually threw him out of the temple. Notice this, the end result of all of this. In this man's hour of need, Jesus comes to him. The Jews cast him out of the temple. The Lord of the temple found him. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And he said, "I believe." The miracles that Jesus performed serve the proof of his message that he was the Son of God. At that moment, the blind man looked into his Savior's eyes, which were filled with a love and compassion he could never explain. And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him with all of his heart. He no longer cared about what the others believed. He knew the truth and finally was set free. I came into this world for judgment, that those who don't see may see, and those that see will become blind. Jesus doesn't force belief or unbelief on either the blind man nor the Pharisees. He acts in a way that reveals God's glory and allows people to choose. The blind man responded by believing, but the Pharisees responded by not believing. Jesus used the blindness of this man to illustrate the darkness of sin and to show that his purpose is for them as well as for you and for me, and for us to come out of the darkness and see clearly the truth that he claims. There are two types of visions, physical and spiritual. May our precious Lord touch you and me and give us both. Yes, miracles are amazing, and they're all from God, whether the ones around you believe it or not. My encounter with bacterial meningitis and being paralyzed on my left side and in a coma for almost a week, and with a very concerned family that had to be called into the hospital twice in life and death situations, was almost 17 years ago. And I thank God that I recovered like our blind man. I got to know 2 of our 3 grandchildren that were born after the event. I also get to tell others, like today, about the miracles that God did for me, and to let them know that he will do the same for you. I am sure that's what the blind man did for the rest of his life. He was blind, now he sees, and he tells others. Let us pray. Dear God, you are the God of light and my Lord. My prayer today is that you will open the eyes of my heart so that I can see you clearly, and so that I can know the security of your eternal nature and your power. Help me to lift you up and glorify you instead of trying to lift myself up and think of myself before others. You are holy. You are God. You are my light and my salvation. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen.